Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for the Natural Capital Partners webinar on the Global Renewable Energy Options for Business. My name is Rebecca Fay, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Natural Capital Partners. We have lots of people already registered, but so I'm going to get started. I think we're expecting a few more, but we already have over 25 people on registered to listen to what we've got to say today. So the reason we've decided to hold this webinar is because we've, I think, all seen a significant increase in the interest in renewable energy solutions from corporates all over the world. But we've also recognised that businesses want help in understanding what their options are for solutions. So today's webinar is designed to explain some of those options, and we're very pleased to have our renewable energy partners from around the world here to talk to you about their specific areas of expertise. To start off with, my colleague Mark LaCroix is going to begin talking about how a global renewable energy portfolio can work for businesses based on the work we've done for clients such as Microsoft, H&M and BNY Mellon. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mark to get started. Thank you.
Great, thanks Rebecca. Next slide, please. Hello everyone. I thought I'd start with a kind of a quick high-level look at some of the drivers for all of this activity. I think certainly, looking back a few years, sustainability in general has been helped by an improving economy. Companies are willing to invest. Also, a few years ago, I think it became acceptable to say the words climate change in Washington again. And we see in the lead up to COP in Paris last year, real engagement by businesses. We track commitments that businesses are making, and literally over the last year or so, we've logged hundreds of new commitments that companies are making to either carbon neutrality, 100% renewable energy, aggressive reduction targets, and this has been greatly facilitated by the engagement of leading NGOs, RE100 in the renewable energy space, the CDP, Climate Neutral Now. All of these NGOs are really supporting the effort and engaging with business and helping them lead the charge, if you will, to a low carbon economy. Next slide, please. So it's clear. I mean, we're talking in this webinar mostly about Scope 2 and renewable energy, but most companies, all companies, have impacts across all three emission scopes, and it's clear that market-based instruments play an important role in mitigating those impacts and helping companies achieve their objectives for overall greenhouse gas reduction. We're focusing primarily on Scope 2, on renewable energy. I think most people looking at the attendee list on this call would agree that the Scope 2 guidance has created clarity around how to account for the myriad of renewable energy products that are emerging around the world within a corporate greenhouse gas accounting scheme. Yes, it has, and for those of you that are responsible for managing that process, it hasn't gotten easier. Location-based, market-based has added a whole new level of complexity, especially for global multinationals. But clearly, market-based instruments play an important role in providing robust documentation that the targets, the claims that companies are making are achieved. And they also allow them, as part of this overall toolbox, they allow companies to set stretching targets that they might not be able to achieve without the use of market-based instruments. So it really is a way to give confidence both internally and externally to stakeholders who are interested in companies' progress against their reduction or renewable energy targets. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick look at the market, that the various options that are available in the marketplace, their degree of impact, their degree of complexity, and to some extent their cost. So it all begins with the tracking systems. The tracking systems are absolutely vital. We don't really have a renewable energy market without the tracking systems, because they are the only way really to allocate the attributes associated with renewable energy production and ensure that the company who is making a claim against those has full and complete ownership. These are RECs in North America, guarantees of origin, IREC, and other regional products around the world. So very, very important. As you move up the continuum, you can start to look at utility green power programs that are bundled with their local production. You can look at locally generated instruments, so local RECs or local GOs. You can look at newer projects. Are you more interested in supporting a project that is just coming online? And you can go 100% new, or you can develop a portfolio with a mix of those projects types. Then moving up the continuum further, you get into longer term agreements, so community solar and wind, PPAs, which there's a lot of talk about PPAs in the marketplace today, a lot of activity. Long-term agreements, innovative products that my co-presenter Previn from ECHOS will be talking about. GO2, an instrument that helps support the development of new renewables. And then, of course, there's always the on-site, implementing a renewable energy project on-site or within your facility. And for most companies, there's usually there's not a single approach. And as programs mature, as companies become more familiar with the options, there's kind of a continuous improvement cycle that we see where companies really move up the continuum and look to have more impact over time. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the various renewable energy market-based renewable energy products around the world that are currently available. I think I just start with a statement that it is the objective of everyone, every panelist on this call, to fill in the gray areas on this map. So global companies with global global energy consumption can build a global portfolio that covers 100% of their footprint. So the products that are available, we're going to be talking in more detail about all these, but in North America you have renewable energy certificates. In Europe, guarantees of origin. You also have, and again this is going back to the kind of the Scope 2 guidance, you have markets like North America and Europe that are considered one market under the Scope 2 guidance, but also grid connections. So where we look very closely at where are these existing markets connected via grid to other regions that maybe don't have an established market. So we look at, because that is in the hierarchy of good, better, best under the Scope 2 guidance, grid connections are very much something that is considered when applying the guidance. And then we have the International REC standard, which we're going to be talking about on this webinar as well, the IREG grid connections, and then you have various national systems, Australia, Japan, where there are national REC products that are available. So next slide, please. So this is really, kind of a typical engagement when we work with, when companies think about how are they going to build a portfolio. There's some real basic questions they need to answer. One, obviously, is consumption by location. So where in the world is all the consumption? What countries? How much? And then overlay on that. Okay, what are the market boundaries? What are the grid connections? What are the renewable energy markets that are available in those regions? So that begins to kind of illustrate what options are available for that particular location. And again, remember the map. There is not yet 100% coverage in the world, but that's improving. That's something that everyone on this call is working hard to change, as noted. So once you've got consumption by location, you understand the market boundaries, what options are available, then you begin to look at the actual instruments. Do we have an interest in a specific technology, wind, hydro, solar? Are we interested in any eco labels or certifications that might go with that? And then last, but certainly not least, what is the budget? Every company has a budget to deal with, and there's typically a per megawatt hour budget that companies are working with. So when you build a portfolio, you really look at, okay, what options do we have? What are the different technologies? And then within those technologies, what is the cost of those relative to each other? And then how much budget do we have? And then you put all that together and build a portfolio that meets your needs. So that's it. I turn it over to Preben.
So thank you very much, Mark. Just one thing before I hand over to Preben, I forgot to mention before that we are going to leave time for questions at the end, so all of the speakers are sticking religiously to their 10-minute allocation of time so that we have some time for questions at the end. And if you have a question, please type it into the box on the right-hand side of your screen so that we can see that, and at the end we will ask the panelists to respond to the things that you've asked. With that, I'd like to hand over to Preben Munch, who is our partner in Europe from ECHOS, and he is going to talk about the European Guarantees of Origin market. Thank you, Preben.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm happy to join you here to take a few minutes and talk about the European side of this renewable energy market. Slide, please. I realize that most of you will know this, but anyway, just a quick reminder. The GEO system is a European-wide system anchored in each country and initiated by the EU Renewable Energy Directive. It's an electronic platform with registries in each country covering the entire value chain from issuance to consumption. On this slide, you see the volume development of the GEO system since its inception, and it's been a pretty nice growth indeed. Mark showed on one of his slides some of the reasons for the growth that we see, and I think this is the same in Europe. Clearly, when we look at this curve, we get the impression that the market has become of a certain maturity, and definitely is becoming a legitimate market and is considered as such. And I think this legitimacy has been underpinned by the new GHG Scope 2 guidance that came out in 2015. I think definitely the sort of the build-up to COP21 played a role in 2015, and certainly continues to do so, in addition to the different initiatives that Mark mentioned, RE100, Beam Business, science-based targeting, etc. So just now to move on to the next one, to say a few words about the way different customers buy GEOs. You know, over the years, meeting customers' wishes and requirements in some countries to have a kind of a third-party seal of approval on the renewable energy instruments, different labels have been introduced. Some of them you see here are sort of national labels, country-specific labels. Germany has a couple, Sweden has one, Switzerland has a couple, and then you know, standards that you would recognize like BREEAM and LEED, and then we have the sort of started out as a pan-European and now is becoming more of a global label, eco-energy. Then we also have, so you know, this corresponds to some customers, you know, again, wish to have a kind of a stamp of approval. And then we have others to choose to define their own criteria for what they see as preferred origins, and which, you know, we reflect in our product offering by communicating specific attributes and specific engagements from our power plant portfolio. Sorry. And then, of course, what many do, also reflected in Mark's presentation, is to build a portfolio of different origins, different qualities, ages, technologies, etc., to balance the engagement, the impact, and the portfolio cost, such to meet any particular company's sort of specific ambitions and strategy. Next, please. Then to visualize this, sort of the European market equivalent to Mark's continuum here, we have, you know, here illustrates different levels, again, different impact, different engagement, and trying to illustrate here that these different, you know, how you engage will influence the impact of your engagement, and also to illustrate that you can, you know, you can enter here on the level you choose, depending on, you know, whether you start a journey which will, you know, at a fairly low engagement, low impact level, and you start on a journey that will carry you upwards to the right, impacting and engaging more, or whether you choose to go sort of jump at a higher impact level from the start. I'd just like to elaborate a little bit on what we call here the additionality products. And if you could jump to the next slide, please. You know, this may look like a well-paid consultant slide. Be assured it's not that complex, and I'm not going to try to, you know, go into every detail of it. The point I want to make here is about the additionality, the additionality product based on the guarantee of origin, which we call GO2, which is available sort of across Europe. And GO2 is, as you saw from the previous slide, it's a high impact. It's a high impact product. It allows the company, the buyer of Geo, to with a lot of flexibility to make it, to make an additionality contribution. It doesn't require necessarily more than 1 year's engagement, so it's a very good way for those who want to have a higher impact and have a direct link, being able to show that what I do leads to this specific result in form of a new power plant. But you can start with 1 year. Can obviously go multi-year, but it's a lower risk and a lower sort of more accessible from all sort of considerations than going and investing in one's own assets or even signing 10-15 year PPA agreement. So with that, I think I stick to my time, and with that, I think I want to leave it at that overview at this stage. Obviously, I'm happy to answer questions in a few minutes when we have closed the other presentations that are to follow, or just change the slide, Sarah. And obviously, you're most welcome to contact me at any point if there are things you would like to dig into in a deeper detail. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Preben. And so now I'm going to ask Kelly Bennett, who's our partner in the US, to talk about, from Greenlight Energy, to talk about talking about the North American Renewable Energy Certificate market. So over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here to talk about how some of the 4.9 million electricity consumers in the United States have purchased 74 million megawatt hours of green power in 2014. You can go to that next slide. Through one of these four mechanisms. You can buy a bundled electricity and REC product from your local utility in 40 states. You can slap some on-site resources on your rooftop or some PV on over your parking facilities. And there's an interesting and growing interest in a power purchase agreement at the summer of, at the end of 2015, particularly in the ICT industry. There were companies like HP and Amazon and Facebook and Google announcing voluntary PPAs. But for the vast majority of green power sold in the United States, and for the 58% of businesses that can't put PV on their facilities for one reason or another, they purchase an unbundled attribute in the form of a renewable energy certificate. And that's what I'll focus this presentation on for the North American market next. So the reason is pretty straightforward. A REC is, without question, the least complex, most cost-effective, and most flexible way for businesses to meet internal renewable energy and sustainability goals. We can custom design a product that meets your preferences, that meets your strategies in a very meaningful way, so you're able to communicate your purchase in the marketplace when you buy a REC the same exact way that you can if in fact you were able to install that solar PV on your rooftop. And it's a very credible product certified through Green E, well established and supported by the federal government through the EPA Green Power Partnership, and more being seen as an important and recognized instrument for reporting purposes with worldwide NGO folks like WRI and the CDP will talk a little bit about those emerging trends at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So I slapped this up here in most of my presentations about RECs for one reason, and that is that in the compliance market, in the voluntary market, the instrument is the same. The currency of renewable energy traded and sold and used for compliance purposes in the United States is a renewable energy certificate. So you're buying the same instrument that the utilities in the 29 states that have generated 98 terawatt hours of renewable energy are using to meet their compliance demands. Next slide. And the reason in which that's important is because making claims and making commitments from a corporate perspective clearly is something that you don't have to be doing, and so you want to do it in the most robust and recognized manner. And the EPA has served since 2001 as an entity which serves to educate, which serves to motivate, and which serves to, in fact, recognize corporate voluntary purchases of renewable energy. And I think at this point there's about 1,300 individual entities that do participate as an EPA Green Power partner. And what's really interesting to me, which is a reflection of what both Mark and Previn have mentioned, is if you take a look at the top corporate purchasers on the EPA Green Power Partnership list, you'll see Intel at the top, and Intel's been sitting there since 2008. Intel buys almost exclusively a REC product. Microsoft purchases RECs and supplements a strategy of power purchase agreements. Kohl's does some on-site PV on their store tops, rooftops, and purchases RECs. So what you see is, again, not a single approach. There is a flexibility for corporations in determining what is the best fit to meet their strategies and to meet their goals. And the EPA certainly recognizes that continuum of commitment to renewable energy internally. And it does so through also recognizing that the purchases are credible and verified, and that is in the United States, kind of the grandmother of all of the third-party certifiers in the renewable energy market is the Center for Resource Solutions Greenie certification program. It's been around since 1997. It's certifying the renewable energy that meets the environmental and consumer protection standards through a very robust stakeholder engagement process, and it requires Greenie certified marketers like myself to disclose clear and useful information to our potential customers. So we're guarding against double counting. We're setting the rules of the marketplace and providing that documentation for that good housekeeping seal of protection for purchasers. Next slide. So of those 74 million megawatt hours sold of green power sold in the U.S. in 2014, Greenie certified 38 million RECs. That is an increase over 13% from 2013. If we talk about what technology buyers are supporting, overwhelmingly it's a wind product, so 84% of the sales are Greenie certified wind products. And that also, I think, is a reflection of being able to describe and communicate support wind as a very readily understood renewable energy technology, but also its utility scale. So it's pretty easy to aggregate that demand for those very large purchasers and deliver that product effectively and efficiently to the marketplace. What is interesting, however, is that 80% of the supply is coming from 10 states. And if we go to the next slide, you'll also see that, oh, it's the slide afterwards, but I can go back to that. You'll see that if, you know, that a REC is king in terms of the sales that are certified by Greenie. So the vast majority of sales that have been certified by Greenie are an unbundled REC product. We do have that green utility green power pricing programs that are selling some RECs to mostly residential customers and some small business customers. And then in deregulated markets, you also have competitive electricity operators that can sell a bundled electricity and REC product to their customers. Next slide. And then if we look at who is buying in terms of volume, you know, the commercial purchasers far and away are the largest volume buyers. I mean, if you look at those EPA Green Power Partnership top 10 list, and you see 3 billion kilowatt hours and 2 billion kilowatt hours and 1 billion kilowatt hour, you get a sense that you've got a very large volumes by small numbers of very large small numbers of purchasers. So the vast majority of transactions are residential, but the volume sits on the commercial side, not surprisingly. And that is a reflection too of 76% of the retail customers are aggregated in just 10 states. That's a reflection of those green power utility pricing programs at work, some very successful utility programs driving a lot of business there. And Greenie did last year hit an all-time program record with certifying the 34 million megawatt hours of renewable energy purchased altogether. And we'll go to the last slide, and I'll just talk really quickly on this slide. I see some emerging trends in the marketplace. One, again, is this credibility with the global NGO partners, the change and the updated Scope 2 guidance, which requires both market-based and location-based reporting, really is driving corporates to look at their not only their global portfolio, but also a location-based evaluation. And with the CDP rewarding and acknowledging market-based purchases and 100% renewable energy commitments, and with an increased interest in the power purchase agreements, what we find is that the REC now is not only a simple market-based instrument to manage greenhouse gas reporting, but also becomes an asset that can be optimized and monetized internally. So these are the ways I think that the REC markets are really going to change and expand, continue to expand over the next few years for North America. And with that, I will wrap up, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Kelly. That was great. So then our next speaker is Jared Brazlowski. He's going to talk to us about the developments of the International REC standard and the solution that is providing for renewable energy in other parts of the world. Jared, over to you. You might need to unmute yourself if you can. We can't hear you, but you're unmuted from our end.
I should be okay now, so thanks for that. I just want to provide a short introduction to the IREC standard. That's a bit difficult for me, I would say, in the time given, but I'll do my best to try and provide a decent overview of what we're doing. If you could go to the next slide, I'll provide an overview of kind of what I want to discuss in the next few minutes. And that is clearly the first one is what is the IREC attribute tracking system. We split it up into 3 different sections: the standard, the infrastructure, and the marketplace. Why do we need an IREC standard is a typical question. Clearly, it's about serving consumer claims in locations where there is no REC tracking system outside of the EU, outside of the US, and outside of Australia. But more importantly, in my opinion, it's about providing best practices to national governments. And then I'll provide a few examples of how the IREC standard is being implemented in particularly Singapore and Turkey. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a bit of an overview of the IREC standard itself. And as I mentioned, it's split into 3 distinct categories. So the IREC standard, the infrastructure, and the marketplace. These are kind of what we saw was needed for the development of really a stakeholder-accepted international standard for REC systems around the world. That's what the IREC standard is. The standard, the first portion, is actually governed by a Dutch foundation. We publish the rules of the IREC standard, so essentially the rules and regulations for which all the IREC standard systems have to abide by is published, and it's also in stakeholder consultation, so it's open for stakeholder review. We'll likely do the first stakeholder consultation for the documentation relatively soon. We've done kind of internally with some organizations, but we're going to open this up more widely to more public review relatively soon. The infrastructure is, of course, an important aspect of the system because this is the registry, you could say. This is the legal documentation behind the attribute tracking system itself. And making sure that the claims are quite clearly delivered from the producer to the consumer in jurisdictions where maybe these claims have never been disaggregated before. And then, of course, we're going to the marketplace, and then we split it up into a number of different areas. And the marketplace is unique to each individual country. So each country will have its own marketplace, you could say, with its own local issuer, with its own registrants, its own device owners, its own participants, and its own consumers. So each individual marketplace is going to be kind of independent from each other, but all adherent to the general IREC standard system. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to show, because the IREC standard system is really about providing attributes from the production side to the consumer. I think this is quite clear. I mean, there aren't systems around the world, and we wanted to do our best to provide reliable, robust, and transparent systems in these locations and try and provide best practices there as well. So it's about providing attributes to the consumer. If you go to the next slide. So that's clearly the first instance. It's about giving consumers a choice in their type of electricity consumption where this choice was historically not available. And if you go to the next slide, it's also about making consumer claims about this. So I purchase renewable electricity. My carbon footprint is. This is based upon Greenhouse Gas Protocol and RE100 best practices and criteria. And we're doing our best to kind of stay in good contact with these organizations to make sure that the developments in the standard are in line with the developments of the international stakeholders and international organizations. My personal interest in this, and most importantly for me, is about creating best practices and tracking systems, because we're getting more and more that national governments are coming to the IREC standard and asking us about our best practices and ways to implement the standard in their own national jurisdictions or national regions. And this is really why we started doing it. We come from a history of the European tracking systems, and in each European country, the European governments needed to implement their own geo system. And we saw that in Europe, there was a standard that was needed. And once that standard was implemented, everyone started slowly following that standard. And we see with the IREC standard, that's happening just about the same way internationally as well. So by providing reliable and robust tracking systems, we're really showing best practices instead of just passively waiting for national governments to implement a system of their own. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how we do this on a national scale, because we do have kind of two ways of doing this, and I know that the time is a little bit of an issue. We do have two ways of doing this, and the most preferred method is with authorizing a local issuer. So this means going to the national authorities, going to the local stakeholders, finding a local party that's authorized by the government in writing, or most commonly through emails and this sort of thing, to try and find a local issuer that is able to work on behalf of the government and implement the tracking system on behalf of the government that is adherent to the IREC code and standard. National governments and stakeholders are quite happy to do this usually, because it does provide some level of reliability across the globe to international purchasers. And it makes it more easily understood exactly what the tracking system that they're doing nationally means. In some situations, this will not be possible because there just isn't a local organization or there isn't an infrastructure in place within the local government that we can really get to and talk to. And in that case, we have to implement what we call the default issuer or the rest of the world issuer. And if you go to the next slide, I'll provide some examples of this, kind of two different examples of how this plays out. So in Singapore, we have very good contacts with the local government. We're in quite detailed communication with them. We answer a lot of questions about the IREC standard, and they've given us now the formal approval in writing to go ahead and issue for biomass within the country of Singapore. So this was in discussion with the government, and it's while the government is still kind of looking for the best system for all types of renewables, for solar, wind, and hydro. And while they're kind of in that process, they're allowing us to then work with biomass at this point in time. And of course, we're in discussion with them about implementing a local issuer, which would likely be a business, a private business, or it would be a nonprofit organization that would work on behalf of the local government in Singapore to kind of conduct issuance services for the local attribute tracking market in that country or region. In Turkey, it's a bit of a different situation. In Turkey, we've had very good contacts with the national government in Turkey for quite a while. They've actually been an observer of the European AIB system for quite a bit of time, but they've never really organized their own system. So what we did was with the IREC standard, we told them that we would implement the rest of the world issuer in IREC that works entirely on a voluntary basis, of course. And as the government starts implementing a national system, we hope that they will. We hope that when they implement the national system, it will, of course, follow the best practices that we've laid out in the IREC standard, or preferably, of course, they would implement a local issuer that would still adhere to the IREC standard in that country or region. So this is kind of the direction that we're taking with the IREC standard. If you go to the next slide, it's just thank you for your attention, and I think there's some contact details there as well. But it's essentially, that's really the direction that we're moving with the IREC standard. If there's any specific questions, I can take them at the end, but there's not a lot of time for questions and answers, so please feel free to get in contact through email as well if needed. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jared. I know that everyone, that was a sort of whirlwind through the IREC standard, so if you would like to ask Jared any more and get any more detail, then please feel free to get in touch with us and we'll put you directly in contact with Jared to find out more about it. But thank you for zooming through that as you did. And I think we will have some time for questions at the end as well, so there should be time for people to ask if they want to know any more right now. With that, last but most certainly not least, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Oliver Crouch, who's going to talk about PowerPlus, which provides an alternative where independent electricity tracking instruments aren't available. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca, and hello to everyone on the call. So PowerPlus is the formalization of an approach we started in 2010 when the IREC tracking system you just heard about from Jared didn't exist. A number of our clients had approached us looking for a renewable energy solution in China and India that would qualify under the LEED certification program. Back then, it was common practice for companies seeking LEED certification to utilize US RECs for international LEED projects. This was accepted under LEED, but many project teams were looking for a more impactful and geographically relevant solution. Natural Capital Partners had over 10 years experience sourcing carbon credits from grid-connected renewable energy projects across Asia, Latin America, and Africa, so we were well placed to provide a solution. While carbon credits represent only avoided grid emissions, importantly, our sourcing contracts went further and wrapped up all of the environmental attributes of those projects. To generate a carbon credit, these projects were performing a simple calculation that started with a number of megawatt hours of renewable electricity generated. We knew this megawatt hour data was metered and had been through the independent third-party verification process required by the carbon standard, such as the VCS, the gold standard, or the clean development mechanism. So we had a very robust audit trail to describe tons in terms of megawatt hours. This ton to megawatt hour ratio is calculated for each project and tells us the number of tons that need to be retired to support any given megawatt hour renewable energy claim. We described this approach and it was accepted as an alternative compliance path by the US Green Building Council for green power credits under the LEED standard. And it allowed us to provide a LEED compliant solution for corporates with buildings in all the markets where we had access to grid-connected renewable energy projects, which are all the countries you see shaded in green on the current slide. And this approach was actually formally integrated into version 4 of the LEED standard. Now in parallel, we were developing a range of metrics to help corporates communicate the community impacts of their emission reduction portfolios. And we applied this approach for corporates communicating the number of megawatt hours supplied to communities, and this was a metric that appeared in many of our clients' sustainability reports. Then in 2015, the GHG Protocol Scope 2 guidance was really the trigger for us to formalize this approach under the PowerPlus product label, where we made the leap to selling megawatt hours to our customers, albeit with that obligation discharged through the retirement of tons that had been verified and validated to a third-party standard. Part of the PowerPlus product development process was to engage the World Resources Institute to test that PowerPlus met their broad definition of a market-based instrument for the purposes of Scope 2 reporting. And WRI were able to confirm that PowerPlus met this definition. We also engaged Jared, who you've just heard from, at the International REC standard. And through those discussions, it became clear that the real opportunity was to make that transition from carbon to energy at the project level rather than a conversion at the unit level, which is the PowerPlus approach. So in early 2015, we joined the IREC system and began educating our project community across those countries in green about the standard and encouraging them to register IREC projects that would allow them to issue megawatt hours rather than tons. But that didn't lessen the need for PowerPlus, as we knew it was going to take time for that transition within our project community and for the IREC tracking system to be established in key consumption markets. So importantly, when we launched PowerPlus, it was positioned as a transitional solution from a market player in Natural Capital Partners that was committed to the expansion of the International REC standard. So PowerPlus was really designed to plug the gaps in a global portfolio that could not be met by existing renewable energy tracking instruments. And gaps exist both on a geographic level and a technology level. Not all of them can be plugged by the carbon market, but many can, and that's where PowerPlus has a role to play. What's exciting is that we've been successful in convincing major renewables buyers to transact PowerPlus, so it has passed that fundamental test. And in parallel, we've been working to accelerate the expansion of the IREC tracking system into new markets and new technologies, because we believe IREC will emerge as the benchmark tracking instrument for Scope 2 claims across most of the world. And what's interesting is that if we overlay the geographic expansion of IREC over the past couple of years, onto that global picture, you see a couple of exciting trends. Firstly, the IREC has been successful in establishing their tracking system in many of the geographies served by PowerPlus. These are the countries shaded in orange, the IREC authorized countries. Secondly, the countries IREC has under active review, shaded blue, will extend their reach well beyond the established carbon markets, which is critical for corporates with consumption in Russia, Israel, the United Arab Emirates and beyond. So that's the geographic picture, and I'll share one more example that speaks to a technology gap. You can see from the map there that India is an authorized IREC market, where IREC projects are currently limited to large hydro. And from a PowerPlus perspective, there is good availability of both wind and solar projects within India. So when we're developing a portfolio for a client with consumption in India, we would typically offer both an IREC and a PowerPlus solution. And often a corporate will choose wind, a PowerPlus wind, say over a large-scale hydro IREC, indicating they place a higher importance on technology than the independence of the standard. And that's really been the story of PowerPlus. We anticipate, looking forwards, that PowerPlus will play a smaller role within the global portfolios we manage, but that is a development we welcome as the market innovates to provide more robust solutions. And my final slide is just encouraging you to check out the PowerPlus website at www.powerplus.energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ollie, very much. So we've had a few questions coming in, so I'm going to ask various of the panelists to give some responses where they can. We've got about 9 minutes left, so we should have time to get through a couple of them. The first question, Mark, is for you, where someone has asked, how does this approach using renewable energy certificates and instruments compare to or work with a company which is also using a PPA or an on-site investment?
Well, great. I mean, it dovetails very nicely. I mean, there are different solutions available in different parts of the world. I think if you look closely at the PPA market, for example, the vast majority of activity is in the U.S. So, and I know, there's a lot of companies looking at how to do PPAs in other parts of the world, specifically China, but you don't have the availability of all solutions in all markets. So especially, if somebody's committed to, a 100% renewable energy goal, they really have to, and they're willing. If you know anything about PPAs, there's a big commitment in time and energy and to get a PPA across the finish line. So it's usually a combination especially for global companies, a combination of the two. And I would just add that the underlying, even if you do a PPA, you have to retain ownership of the RECs or the GOs that are generated. So again, back to the original point that I made a while back at the beginning, these tracking systems are vital to the integrity of the environmental claim. So whether it's a PPA, an unbundled REC, or some other product, you've got to retain ownership of those instruments.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. And that mention of 100% renewable energy commitment leads me nicely on to another question we received, which is for Ollie, I think for you to start, and then Jared maybe as a follow-up. How does a corporate use this approach for their RE100 commitments in markets without certificates?
Yeah, and Rebecca, I think that's a great question. If you recall back to the slides, that sort of global picture slide that I put up, you'll see the rapid expansion of the IREC tracking system. So I would say really IREC is the best solution if you're currently you've got a large consumption in a market not currently served by IREC. I'd say that's really the opportunity to collaborate with the IREC standard to try and bring their tracking system into that market. And really, I'll let Jared talk to the market conditions, but really all you need is a willing corporate buyer of the tracking instrument, a willing project to take down the IREC route, and then you need to work with IREC to try and get that country authorized. So that's I think that's really the opportunity. And then potentially another application that would also involve IREC. You've just heard Mark talking about PPAs. If you're a corporate and you're trying to line up a PPA in a market that doesn't really have an established PPA market, but you think you've got a line of sight of a deal, but you're a little unsure about the verification of the attributes, if you like, then again, you could use the IREC in that context, because a PPA is simply a bundle between a physical power and a tracking instrument. So if you've got the physical power lined up, then you could use IREC to provide the assurance around the environmental attributes of a PPA in one of these emerging markets.
Thank you. And Jared, have you got anything to add to that?
Sure. I'm on the technical working group of RE100, and I won't speak on behalf of RE100. I'll speak out of my personal capacity. But what I can say is the organization isn't out to, of course, find out where you're not purchasing renewable electricity, because as we realize, of course, that there are a lot of holes right now internationally. And this is where I really think that I need your guys' help specifically and all stakeholder health, because I think what is really necessary is to develop these markets is really mainly informing stakeholders on the ground. And that's why we can't do it ourselves, and the market players can't do it themselves as well. We really just need kind of stakeholder collaboration around single principles that we can really move forward and kind of influence kind of the developments that are happening on the ground in these different countries or regions, and make sure that the developments that are happening are accepted by all the various stakeholders. So we know, of course, that there are holes in the different marketplaces, but these are kind of coming now into line. A lot of these countries recognize the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 2 document. This really helped kind of provide some information to a lot of local stakeholders. They're following the developments in CDP, they're following the developments in RE100, and I think the last step is really that stakeholders kind of together as a grouping provide and kind of a single direction for which these countries can develop their own national markets.
Great, thank you very much, Jared. I have another question here, which is also for Jared and for Ollie, which is, would the methodology of IREC and or PowerPlus apply to new technologies like tidal or wave energy? Jared, thoughts about that?
Sure. The IREC tracking system is actually an agnostic delivery system for production attributes from the production side to the consumption side. So we do not have any criteria based upon any vintage criteria or any sort of information such as this. We clearly allow for the delivery of attributes from the production to the consumption side. That being said, we do allow, just like most modern tracking systems in Europe and the US, we allow for labeling systems like potentially a future Greenie International label, or for eco-energy, or for other sustainability labels to provide their own criteria on top of the attribute tracking system, which has sustainability criteria or vintage criteria. And this is really who I would go to for these types of consumer claim standards information. I'm sure PowerPlus, through their work with offset criteria, has similar type of criteria in place as well. But the IREC standard itself is an attribute tracking system, and we focus primarily on the clear delivery of attributes from production to consumption. Ollie?
Yeah, and I would just add, as Jared said, the PowerPlus really leans on the existing methodologies within the carbon world. So to the extent that those methodologies exist and they're grid connected, then in theory, yes, PowerPlus could be a solution. But if it's something completely new, I think it's clear that the future lies in IREC. So that's probably the better standard to to look for that solution within.
Great, thanks, Ollie. We've got 1 more minute, and I'm just going to try and squeeze in one more question, because we've had a few questions about GO2 that Previn talked about. One of which is, Previn, could you talk about, you mentioned flexibility as a characteristic of GO2. Could you elaborate? Could you just give us sort of 30 seconds on flexibility of GO2? I know that's hard, and we will follow up separately with other questions that are sitting here on that.
Yes, 30 seconds is a little brief, but so the flexibility, there are several sort of parts of that. One is the way GO2 works is that there's a geo certificate in the bottom, and there is a financial a money contribution part, and this money contribution part, to make a long story short, is used to lend money to a project that is almost fully financed but not quite. So there's a big, that money has a big leverage with the equity and the bank financing of the project. So that money will actually cause a lot of new megawatt hours to be built and to be produced in the future. The flexibility is that because of that leverage, with a fairly limited amount in GO2 money contribution, we can cause a new power plant to be built. We have 3 power plants now being financed in this way by our customers, or being built because and thanks to this last financial contribution from our customers. And they do that with just 1 year's commitment. So they don't have to, sort of commit long term. They can do this, try it out, they like it, it works, they can do it again if they want. They can do it for a few years and then they can do something else. It's, that's the kind of flexibility that I refer to, in addition to the fact that the contractual framework is fairly simple, and we do sort of all of the practical aspects. So it's not a super sort of complex 50 to 100 page contract that you might see in other more complex setups.
Great, thank you very much, Preben. I know that was a difficult task to do it quickly, but we do have a few other questions and we'll follow up on that separately. So with that, we've just run 1 minute over the hour, and I'd like to thank all of the panelists very, very much for your time in presenting, rapidly presenting the start to what's a quite complex market. I would like to thank all of the attendees for taking the time to listen, and rest assured we will be following up with more information about renewable energy solutions and how they can help businesses with this quandary of complexity. And please, in the meantime, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And with that, thank you very much.